Once you
know.
get the system going, there's plenty of demand and reimbursement, if you're an insurance-based practice, the reimbursement is strong for that compared to a lot of other services. And if you're a cash-based practice, the going fees are going to be high for that. So it is, as far as gross income, there's a lot to have for it. There is the barrier that what you said, James, like it's not as ongoing of a relationship as psychotherapy is, and so you have to market it more. But in most communities, there's such a demand, you don't need to necessarily, I think, advertise a lot to be able to develop that flow.
Going back to a couple episodes ago, we talked about developing relationships in your community or your network. And if you're offering something that other people don't offer that can support them with their work, you're going to get, and you're a good neighbor, you're going to get referrals. You just will.
Absolutely.
Hello, and welcome to the Scaling Therapy Practice. This is James Marland. This week, we have a great conversation with Dr. David Hall about adding a testing psychologist to your practice. Thought it was a pretty interesting discussion about thinking through some of the things you might not always think about when adding a new person to your office. It's just like adding another master's level therapist, right? Well, not really. Throughout the episode, we talk about the threads of some decisions you're going to have to make. Like, are you going to take the courses yourself, or are you going to hire? And that talks about capacity and your strengths and what you really like doing. And then another decision that for adding a testing psychologist is what type, what's the niche? Is it going to be the medical ones? Is it going to be for school children? Is it going to be for work? Is it going to be for leadership or employment? Like, what are the type of tests that you're going to offer? There's a wide range variety, and that probably will determine, it's determined by who's already coming into your office and who are the preferred people that you like to see. Because when you offer that specialty, you're going to get more of them for sure. Another decision is who to hire. Are you going to hire a fully licensed person, or are you going to start up an internship program and kind of grow them? And there's challenges with both, of course. And then reimbursements and compensation, like that's another decision. Can you afford, can your practice afford higher overhead and higher reimbursement for the psychologist? Of course, we talk about the pros. The pros of adding a testing psychologist is its diversification. You're adding another service. You're able to serve the community differently and better. Uh, they can be very lucrative. Insurance reimbursements, once you get the flow going, can be quite well. Um, and there's always a demand. Like another benefit is when I when I worked with school children, that psychologist was busy. It felt like 100% of the time, overbooked with a wait list a month long for individual IEPs. I called them EAPs in the episode, but IEPs, individual education plan, I think it's called. She was so busy all the time. And then some of the other testing ones, the ones for the medical appointments, the bariatrics and the spinal fusion, I think they couldn't keep up. In fact, they had the interns, the psychologist interns doing them, and they were supervised. So it was quite good. So you can make a lot of money. Of course, the things to consider would be there's higher overhead. You got to pay them more. You might have they psychologists send out so much more paperwork. There's more testing. There's more coordination of care. So who's that going to fall on? You, the owner? Probably not. So you got to consider that. And then the right fit. Are you who's the right fit for your office? That can be some challenge for you. So let's get into the episode as we talk about adding a testing psychologist to your practice. Thank you, David Hall, for bringing this to us, and we'll see you at the end of the episode.
Psych Maven is proud to support the Scaling Therapy Practice podcast. And if you are someone looking for ideas that are tailored to your own personal style on how to scale and grow your own impact and income as a mental health provider, we hope you might check out our free online assessment. If you go to stp.psychmaven.com, you can take our free personal inventory and find out what your builder type is as a helping professional. This assessment is quick and fun, and it comes with tons of customized resources with your results, so you can discover the best ways to scale that match your own personality. Find the assessment at stp.psychmaven.com. That is stp.psychmaven.com. Have fun with it.
Hello and welcome to the Scaling Therapy Practice. My name's James Marland. I'm here with Dr. David Hall. Hello, David.
Yes, you are.
How are you? Yeah,
I'm well.
Here I am. This week, we're going to talk about adding a testing psychologist to your practice. A very exciting episode. But first, we're going to talk about our tool, tip, or tech of the week. I am going to go first. I've got this book, Getting Things Done, by David Allen. Have you ever read it?
No, I've not seen it before.
It's amazing. It's the art of stress-free productivity. And I was introduced to this book like 3 or 4 years ago at one of Joe Sanek's, the Killing It camp there in Colorado. And a presenter did a whole thing about getting things done. And I'm like, oh, this is great. I'm going to buy the book. So I bought the book and it sat on my shelf for like 2 years. But
yeah,
when I eventually got around to reading it, one of my favorite tips from this book, and it's filled with them, is when you have a to-do list next to your item, write the very next thing that needs to be done. So if I think one of the examples was changing the oil in your car. Okay. So that is a to-do item. The tip here is put next to it, call oil change often, call the oil change mechanic or whoever, call mechanic. That's the very next thing to do to move that task down the list. And you could complete the whole task with just that step because you call it, you schedule it, you take it in. Or it could be, you call, you find a date, but then the next thing is like find a ride to the place so that you can drop it off and drop it back. And that prevents you from like losing things or getting stuck in the process, and also just not even getting started. Because I think that's one of my, you have this big thing and you think you got to do it all, and it like becomes paralysis of analysis or overwhelming you with this big task. But he said, do just the very next thing, write down the very next thing. And he has a whole system in there, and there's even software on how to do this and the getting thing done stuff. But I just love that tip for checklists and things. What is my very next thing to do? And then I do that and it moves me along. So that is my tip of the week.
Mine is right before James and I hit record, we were talking about social media posting and kind of efficiency in that. And I've not used this system yet. And so we may come back on in a later episode and we may have a different opinion of it. But a podcast I follow, and there was something that came up that I took a note of like, oh, I want to utilize this in the future. And it's a repurpose.io is the website, repurpose.io. And and there are other things like it, like Hootsuite, but like this is one of the newer SaaS's, software as a service, but where it allows you to post in one place and it will repurpose the content and allow you to then do a single post, and it goes up on multiple social media channels like LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram and TikTok or whatever you're using. Yeah. And you need things like that because all these platforms are, they don't like it when you record in one and then just take, if it's the TikTok slash Instagram reel slash YouTube short kind of thing. That's a popular format right now, but it will create watermarks, and the AI knows it. And so the AI is not going to be disinclined to promote in the algorithm something that's a repost from another platform or that redirects towards another platform. And so this service allows it to publish in ways that appear native, and that will help you in your algorithm finding and all that. But if you're doing anything, you're trying to develop a social media presence, repurposing content and putting stuff in multiple places right now, at least, is a big thing. And as much as you can make things easier for yourself, better.
So, and just for my example, I have podcasts and sometimes I even record video, like newsletters and things. And I spend a couple hours, cutting it up, making sure it's the right format, putting titles on it. Uh, Even just the very fact of signing into TikTok or Instagram and posting it takes a little bit of time, not a ton, but I'd rather be doing something else.
Mhm.
And it does have, I'm going to check into this, but it does have, for $25, you can connect into a bunch of video features and use it per month. I don't know how many postings it makes. I'll have to dive into that. But for $25, could I upload a video and have it chop it up and throw it into my Instagram and my YouTube feed shorts and all that stuff? I mean, that sounds like a deal.
Mhm.
So we'll come back and
We'll
talk to
come
you
back
about this.
yeah.
But there are lots of new tools coming out like this every week, it seems like.
Mhm.
So great tool and tip, David. Thank you so much for bringing that back to my attention. Well, we're going to get into a subject, adding a testing psychologist to your practice. So my introduction to testing psychologists was I worked at a day hospital, and every 3 times a week, somebody came in that I didn't really know, and she went into a room, and people would shuffle into the room, and then they would leave, and she was always busy. And eventually, I saw her in the hallway and talked about what she did, and she was like a child psychologist who did testing, especially for EAPs and do you have EAPs in
Yeah,
Tennessee?
the educational plan, but it's
Yeah.
or employee assistance programs, yeah. But yeah, we do those.
Oh, maybe I used the wrong term,
Are you
but
talking
it
about the
was for
education?
kids.
Yeah,
It was
it's
for kids.
education plans. EAP is usually employee assistance program, and
Yeah,
that
yeah,
is
yeah.
something that we'll do. But yeah, I can't think of the acronym for it, but it's an educational plan, and it's a mandated thing
Yeah,
for
so they
kids with
needed a
accommodations.
psychologist for that to get a diagnosis and to write up a plan, and there was also, like, ADHD referrals and just all sorts of services that couldn't be accessed without a doctor giving some sort of diagnosis and treatment plan. And she was busy like all the time. The her wait list, especially during like the high peaks of school hours, was incredible. Like the normal like end of school ramp up times to
Mhm,
get services was incredible. And she said there just wasn't enough testing psychologists to go around.
mhm,
And I've talked to other practices, later in the career as they think about how they want to scale and expand. And one of the things that comes up is adding a testing psychologist to the practice.
mhm.
So David, you're a psychologist. What do they do? Like what? Like explain
Well,
to us here.
yeah,
What do the psychologists do, and what's their scope?
it's a great question, James. For those people who are less familiar with all the individual disciplines in psychotherapy, of marriage and family therapy, of professional slash mental health counseling, depending on, it's called different things depending on your state, clinical social work psychology. it's one of the unique things about psychology is the psychometric testing. Though, um, to say there are some tests that are administered by other licenses as well. For example, I've done training in career testing. I'm a big fan of the Strong's interest inventory is one I use, and that's one that you have to have qualifications to do, but you don't have to be a psychologist. You can be somebody with a master's degree in a few different disciplines. But there's certain tests. The Wechsler's one. There a lot of the sort of testing that James is talking about to qualify for certain diagnoses, oftentimes related to IQ testing or disability testing. There's
Mm.
certain ones that are, in most places, are exclusive to psychologists. And I trained in them. I did a doctorate in psychology and I trained them. It's funny, I don't do testing.
Mm.
Some of it is preference. I found it fascinating on some level. And on another level, I found doing testing very boring because it is very rote for a lot of them. You go through certain exercises and it's very kind of meticulous. In some ways, it feels very different than psychotherapy to me. Because psychotherapy feels a lot more like playing jazz, at least how I do psychotherapy. It's a lot of adapting and the conversation goes in certain places, whereas testing is a lot more, it's like learning an orchestral piece. Like there's a lot of,
Oh, fine tuning and being
yeah.
precise and
Yeah.
interpretation of what you're given. Yeah.
And so I'm not interested. And the other thing is I don't maintain a license as a psychologist. I'm a licensed therapist. I want to clarify for people. I'm not practicing without a license, but I'm licensed as a marriage and family therapist, as a professional counselor, and I don't maintain a license as a psychologist. I'm a psychologist by education, but not my licensure. And so I can't do testing currently unless I were to change my licensure status. But as I said, I don't find it on a personal level appealing. However, to your point, James, it's something huge in demand. I get inquiries constantly because I am trained as a psychologist.
Mhm.
People will see like I'm a PsyD, a doctor of psychology, so people will look me up. I get asked all the time about it personally. I get asked just as a practice owner in my community for referrals and resources. I have a fairly short list of people in my community that do it, and they, like what you're saying, are often on a wait list, and particularly ones that will offer it to children in the different
Yeah.
testing that's needed there. But there's definitely a huge demand, and for entrepreneurial minded people, practice owners will often think about like, well, should I do this, or should I, whether personally should I, go on
Go
and get further
go on and
training,
do it. Yeah.
yeah, or should I think about hiring somebody to do this? And I did work in a group practice where there were psychologists that offer testing. Same thing, their testing schedule was booked out quite far.
I worked with a autism clinic
Mm.
and their wait list was like 6 months or something. It was incredible. And then, what are some of the other fields? Like I worked with, uh, I think there's like bariatric
Yeah,
testing
that's a
and like
requirement there for people.
spinal injury testing, right?
Mhm.
Bariatric. I'm not,
For different medical procedures, oftentimes you'll need a specifically a psychologist assessment,
right.
using some of these tests for that.
And then there's like forensic
Mhm,
psychologists. He was very busy. He flew around the country doing stuff. I don't
mhm.
we just handled his schedule, but I don't remember exactly what he did, but his schedule was very
For
busy.
forensic, oftentimes that's related to criminal
Yeah.
investigations. That's less specific tests, but more just a process of assessment. But it is, and there's demand.
Yeah. So, okay. So we know there's demand and we know, you need it for certain procedures, but why would somebody who's got a group practice or even just a solo practice, why should they consider adding a testing psychologist to their practice to scale?
Well, there's the income from the testing itself that it is,
Okay.
and if you're an insurance-based practice, oftentimes what insurance will reimburse, and typically a lot of assessments are within scope of uh, an insurance reimbursement schedule. Oftentimes it's quite lucrative compared to psychotherapy reimbursement, even for a psychologist. Like what a psychologist will get reimbursed from an insurance company from doing an hour's worth of testing assessment versus an hour's worth of psychotherapy is vastly more
Are
that
we
they'll get.
talking like $100 more?
I don't have any rates right in
You don't
front of
have
me,
it rates in front of you? Yeah.
I mean, I think oftentimes it will represent double or more
Okay.
of, and that'll be different in different insurance plans and things like that. I definitely know out of pocket. And part of when you pay for testing out of pocket, there's the time for the assessment, and then there's the write-up that the
The write-up
psychologist has
afterwards, yeah.
afterwards, and so there's more time involved, but even the time per money is often double or more.
Okay.
So it's lucrative. Because of the demand, if you're a group practice owner that, let's say you're generally a psychotherapy counseling practice, but you add this as a service, it can be a way to build referrals for your other services because people may be coming to your practice for assessment.
Right.
But once they're there, they may also be interested in other services that you have to offer. And that can be a way to generate referral flow for the other providers in your office that are providing other services, more traditional services to what you may offer. And the reason people are finding your practice initially is because you have testing.
You're solving a problem that they desperately need.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're
And so,
searching out.
yeah, and because of that, you may benefit from the trickle down effect of
Mhm.
because someone's coming to your practice for that, there's this benefit. It can also help you in the credentialing process with insurance because insurance companies may be more willing to credential your practice as a whole and credential and schedule a higher reimbursement rate if you're offering a more unique service. Because they have certain measurements it's related to federal and state funding with Medicaid and Medicare
Mhm.
programs. The insurance companies have to be showing a certain amount of coverage, and that will often affect what they'll offer for reimbursement.
Okay.
And so if you're particularly in an in-network practice, this can help in your credentialing process, both getting credentialed initially with an insurance plan and what you can get generally for your reimbursement rates.
Cool. So speaking about rates, like what are some of the things you need to consider when you add a testing psychologist? I guess we'll go with costs first. Like what are some of the, like, everything costs something. There's a pros and cons like list, but what are some of the things to consider when you're adding another service line like this?
Well, if it's hiring an outside person, what they will expect for remuneration for pay
Mhm.
is going to be different than a master's level therapist.
Right.
It typically, it's been a while since I've looked, but I think the last time I looked, I think average pay for a psychologist, which is going to be a doctor level person versus let's say a licensed professional counselor or licensed mental health counselor is going to be about $20,000 more a year for a full-time person.
Okay.
And of what just kind of average industry pay is. And, they will, they'll likely expect that, if you're hiring somebody as an employee. So there's the expense of you may be able to bring in more for their services, but they also expect to make more in
Mhm.
their services. And that's one. Um, it's a smaller pool of people because in most states at this point, to be a psychologist, it requires a doctorate degree. I can't say that absolutely because it's changed over the years, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Okay.
Because it used to be in certain states you could become a psychologist at a master's level, and certain states had and still do have, um, they'll call them psychological examiners, but it changes. Like that's a license that's been sunsetted in my state. There used to be a license in Tennessee. It was a licensed psychological examiner, which was a master's level person that worked directly under a psychologist, but that would do testing and psychotherapy. And the license still exists, but they don't license new people.
Okay. So it's gonna
And
be
yeah,
ending.
eventually it's just people that have maintained licensure, and I can't remember when it was sunsetted. And so different states have different things, but assuming you're in a place where you have to have a doctorate, that's gonna shrink your pool of people. The amount of people in the job market that have master's degrees in a mental health discipline is going to be far larger than someone with a doctorate degree. And so there are fewer people to recruit.
Yeah.
The other thing is the tests themselves. So I was having
Oh,
lunch
yeah.
because
Yeah.
they're expensive.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
And I connected with a psychologist in my community about a year or two ago, and he'd come across my radar, and he had a very distinctive last name, and I realized I knew his family. I didn't know him specifically, but I knew
Mhm.
I had grown up with cousins of his, and I'd reach out to him. I go, hey, I grew up with your cousin Gaines, and would love to connect. And we end up having lunch together. Delightful man. He's in my community, Dr. Frank Pittenger. But I asked him, he was a psychologist, and I asked him about testing because that's often a need I had. And I don't know what the case is currently. But when I asked him, he said, well, I haven't spent the money to get the assessments. And because he was trying to figure out what assessments to buy, because you have to buy them from APA, typically, I think is who puts them out, the American Psychological
Okay.
Association. And when you have a monopoly on something, it's amazing how expensive you can make it. And so
Yeah.
I think a lot of them are in like the thousands of dollars. And each test costs, and so some of it is even figure out what are the tests I'm most likely to do and what do they cost and how do I, but so the testing material is an expense.
Yeah, that
And
makes
it's
sense.
oftentimes a not small expense.
And
And so
sometimes you have to send them away to score them, and that's an expense,
mhm.
and,
Yeah, and it's so there's equipment, I guess, involved
yeah.
with it. And sometimes it's not just the paper in it, like there's of different tests that I did training in, there was like spatial reasoning things with it. So part of
Mhm.
getting test was there was these different pieces to it of
Yeah.
like blocks and things like that.
Yep.
And I had the benefit of when I was in school, I happened to work for a practice that had testing psychologists because I don't know what I would have done because I basically I could borrow the assessments from the practice I worked for, and I would have had to find something. I mean, I can't imagine buying it
Mhm.
outright as a student, but that was a tricky thing, and I was just very blessed in that I didn't have to go very far for it, but
Alright. Great. Well, that's something I hadn't thought of, the testing equipment and the paperwork and all that. But what about, some things like admin costs or insurance costs? Like, do you think, adding a psychologist would increase
it
the
depends
admin
what you're
costs?
doing.
Because, um, with people who are ongoing clients, they schedule once and then they might have a reoccurring appointment
Mm,
or they can use the portal. A lot of the testing patients, you schedule once and then maybe you have a one follow-up and a second follow-up and that's it. Like it's like you're
yeah,
churning patients.
it's a good question, James. I I can imagine it being more burdensome, but it depends what sort of system you're already running. If
Mhm.
you already have like a scheduler that's scheduling for your therapist, and then it could maybe slide into that. I think about for my personal practice, I don't have an admin scheduler person. Like people book with all our
Mhm.
therapists online, or therapists manage their own schedule. With it, there's a certain amount of admin we do, but we have it fairly streamlined. But that's for psychotherapy, for counseling, and in testing. I don't know if I could get away with this current system.
Yeah.
And some of it is I work in a job market where putting some of the scheduling responsibilities on therapists is more acceptable. I don't know if I could do that with a doctoral level
Right.
psychologist.
Yes. And
And
also they also send out more paperwork. Like
mhm.
they just send there's more paperwork. They receive packets and they need things at certain times to do their assessments. And so some of that adds a burden. Would you want to put that on your doctoral staff level?
Would they accept it?
Yeah, would
Is
they
some
accept it? Yeah.
yeah. So it is, those are things I imagine, having not done it personally as a business owner. It feels kind of hypothetical to me, but there
Sure.
is,
Okay.
you know,
What about insurance? Is there extra insurance or things for
again, I
psychology?
think it depends on, I think it would be really tricky if you're running a cash-based psychotherapy practice, but then wanted to credential for insurance for this because it, then if you're not already having insurance billing, then yeah, that's a whole different thing. It's more units. Like, one of the benefits of psychotherapy versus other medical disciplines is the units you're billing for typically are fewer. Um, there's a 9043, I can't remember it now off the top of my head, but
Yeah.
there aren't a lot of different things that we bill for in our practice. We do
Right.
out of network billing, and so I think there are 3 units we typically use
Yeah.
commonly, and so these would be some different units, and you would need to make sure whoever was providing your billing services was familiar enough of the coding needs, and so I could see that, but I think it's deciding. There are lots of things that people will think about, like, oh, this is great. This is an added service. I can see demand. I should absolutely do this. And my response to most people, depending on whatever i- that variable is, whatever your X is that you're thinking about adding to the equation, my general advice to people is maybe it's a good idea. Uh, I think in the altruistic view of things, when you see a need and want to attend to that need, I think that's good. And I want to encourage that in people and all that, but you've got to figure out what is the space you have to close between the you see the need and what does it mean to meet it, and what will that take out of you as an entrepreneur, as a practice owner, to do, whether to get personally trained, or, as I said, like, even if I was a psychologist in my licensure, I try to think of, would I be doing testing right now? And no. Even if I found it more stimulating. And this sounds bad. I feel so selfish because I recognize there's a big need for it, but I just didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
And
Well, the
but
people who love it, love it. Like,
yeah,
they wanna do it all day long. And
but
the
and I
people
loved
who
yeah, and but I love doing psychotherapy.
yeah.
And when I did my doctorate, I did a lot of psychotherapy, and I do a lot less now because I don't have time to do more, because I run multiple businesses, and, like, there are different uh, demands on my time. And so because of that, I say that, my job as a psychotherapist is like my 4th job,
Mm,
'cause I'm a supervisor, I'm a practice owner, I work as a teacher, like, all
mhm.
these things as far as my time goes. Uh, and so I could have spent all this energy getting there, and would I've had the capacity to do it. Now, if I, um, got licensed and credentialed and offered that service, I feel pretty confident I could fill my days with it. But is that what I is that scaling?
Right.
Because then I'm in the exchanging time, and so I think that's the tension. There are lots of things that are good, and I think that's what's hard, is because we ultimately want to provide a service that is a benefit to our community, and there's so many things that are good,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
can you do it, or can you make it happen? Here would be some things to consider, though. What are Do you live in a community that has a doctoral program that's producing psychologists? Because that's a consideration, because there is the University of Tennessee in Knoxville is is in my hometown and where I work, and they have multiple doctoral level psychology programs. They have a doctorate in counseling psychology, they have a doctorate in educational psychology, they have a doctorate in clinical psychology. All of them are getting trained in testing.
So does that help or hurt?
I think that would help,
It helps.
because that is a workforce. Those are people in
Okay.
the market that I could, if I was wanting to pursue that, I'm more likely to be able to find qualified people because there's a training institution in
Mhm.
my area, versus if I lived in a town that didn't have a university that was graduating a psychologist, it'd probably be harder for me to find them.
That
I
makes
would
sense.
I would
Um,
assume.
Now I know when I worked at the hospital, they had APA, like we had in psychology or psychologist interns who would come in. Could a practice do that and have
That is an
doctor level?
excellent point. Like, yes, because in most programs, once you finish school, you have to do a APA approved internship site. And there's a process of being an approved site, and that is a huge part of the funneling process because in most places, once you finish school, you can't just work independently.
Right.
You have to go through your and it was one of the things that made me decide not to get a psychology license because I finished my program and I had already
I know. It's another year or so,
it's another
right?
year. I finished my program. I was already licensed as a psychotherapist,
Yeah.
and where I worked was not an approved site. And so I would
Yep.
have had to have get another job.
And there's a cutthroat competition out there for it.
Oh, yeah.
From the students I talked to, they would submit their applications and they weren't even sure where they were going, or even if sometimes you didn't get accepted or there were too many students for the places. And so then they had to either go to a place that they weren't sure of or wait for the next round. It was, I felt sorry, psychologist. I felt bad for you because you did your degree and
Yeah.
then you don't even know where you're going. And you might be working in a place that, our hospital was great, but you might have worked in a place that it wasn't
Mm,
exactly your first, second, third, or fourth pick. So
yeah.
maybe
So
it's somebody
so
could set
pers
me straight on that, but that's how I understood it.
no, it is kind of it's like residency matching for people who finish med school,
Mm,
but, it can be yeah, and people usually have to move for it or
yep.
often do, and so I would say that if this is a serious service you wanna offer, then figuring out how to either partner with or become an APA approved site can be hugely important, but it is we talked about this in a previous episode, but you're gonna have a problem. We've talked about this in a few episodes. You're gonna have
Yeah.
a problem. Like, there is offering assessment services has offers unique solutions to people you're trying to serve, but also presents some unique problems for you as a service provider. And it might be completely worth it for you, or it might
Mhm.
not be. And so it's figuring that out. But the other thing I'll say is, even though a lot of the assessments we talk about, I don't offer, I do offer some. I like career testing. Part
Mm,
of that is I like career counseling. I like the sense of vocational matching for people. I've worked traditionally as a therapist with a lot of college students and graduate students, and oftentimes the trying to define and figuring out how to plan for and pursue career options is part of their journey, and I really like that. And there's assessments I do for that, that I like doing. Part of it is the assessments are a lot more automatic. They go on an online portal, and I'm not giving the assessment in the same way I would for a lot of psychologist-only assessments. But that's a service I offer in my practice, and that is a niche because we advertise doing career testing and people come to us for that. And so sometimes it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Sometimes you can assess like, well, I want to offer some more psychometric sorts of things. What might be things I can offer at my current licensure level, or what might be
right.
things that there's demand for? So it's it's rarely a binary decision, an all or nothing.
Uh, so what so we talked a lot about the costs. Can we talk a little bit about how this could be a benefit? Like how can you make money in this situation once you account for all the costs?
I mean, we talked about that in the sense of, you make money because it grows your practice. You make money because there's good reimbursement for it.
Okay.
Those are the main ways I'd say.
Fees, insurance, maybe the insurance companies pay more for a certain thing. I know the specialized services where I used to work was a big money maker. They did
Yeah.
the weight loss, the bariatric evals, the spine
Once you
eval.
get the system going, there's plenty of demand and reimbursement, whether if you're an insurance-based practice, the reimbursement is strong for that compared to a lot of other services. And if you're a cash-based practice, the going fees are going to be high for that. So it is, as far as gross income, there's a lot to have for it. There is the barrier of that, to what you said, James, like it's not as ongoing of a relationship as psychotherapy is, and so you have to
Mhm.
market it more. But in most communities, there's such a demand, you don't need to necessarily, I think, advertise a lot to be able to develop that flow.
Going back to a couple episodes ago, we talked about developing relationships in your community or your network. And if you're offering something that other people don't offer that can support them with their work, you're gonna get and you're a good neighbor, you're gonna
Mhm,
get referrals.
mhm,
You just will.
absolutely.
So did we cover how do you add a testing psychologist? I think we talked about having that APA program, but
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to hiring in lots of things, but it's just being prepared, like, if you're serious in looking at it, the first thing I would do is go online to Indeed, Monster, LinkedIn Jobs. Look, what is the psychologist employment opportunities in your area? That will give you an idea of salary range. That will give you an idea of just, I mean, there's few job ads I've ever posted that I didn't lift from somebody else,
mhm,
to some degree of like, well, what did somebody else post? And like, how do I adapt it? Like, oh, they made sure to add this to it, for qualifications or for, and uh, figuring out what's going to be, you need to know the why for a potential candidate. Why would they want to come work for you? And
mhm,
thinking about, what are you going to add? Is it clientele? Is it admin support? Is it insurance billing? Is it the fact that you're an approved site for something they need? Is it stability of income? And because you might have a great idea of why this will benefit you, but unless you can, part of building a team is, unless you can clearly articulate,
articulate?
articulate. Thank you. Sorry, that word just didn't want to come out right. Articulate the benefit to them,
Right.
then
Yeah.
uh, you're going to be at a loss.
So we're gonna wrap up the question about adding a testing psychologist with this question: is it worth it? And I'm gonna nail you down a little bit because I don't want you to say it depends. I want you to tell me who would this be good for, and who would it not be good for. So who's it
I'm go-
worth it for?
I'm going to start with, it depends. Depends
Oh
on who you are.
man.
But like, but I'll let the Jello be nailed down. If you are the sort of, like, it takes more organizational predispositions in a system for this to happen, because there are more components than just running psychotherapy.
Mhm,
Similar to having psychiatry or other medical sorts of things, this is more complex. And if you do well with complexity, or your system does well with complexity, it's better to add in. If you are already well tapped into demand for this, if you're getting a lot of requests for this, if you're just hearing about this for the first time and no one's ever talked to you about it, it's going
right,
to be harder to get it going than
sure.
if you're aware of inquiries for this all the time. And do you have a do you have the means to recruit for this?
Mm,
Either nearby programs, the relationships you have. If you're in a very remote area and you're not aware of a lot of demand and you're not a really organized person, this isn't for you.
yeah.
But if you're aware of the demand, if you have the organizational structure in place that can accommodate this, and if you have a plan for recruitment and retention for this sort of employee, then yeah, I think it would be for you.
Cool. And just going back, they're probably gonna need more clients than your regular
Mhm,
staff, although their units are more too, so that sort of offsets it.
mhm.
Anyway, good discussion, David. Do you have one thing you want people to remember from this episode?
Um, it depends. Is that, well, I would say that that a lot that it scaling is almost never perfunctory. there are lots of things that we might talk about in our conversation, James, that are ideas of this is one way to scale. And it's figuring out, is this a good way for you? Because it
Mm,
may be, it may not be. And I think psychologist and testing is one of those examples of that is a strong depend sort of thing. That if that could be a great angle for you to take, or it may not. It may be that that's not your burden to carry. And that is not a sign of failure or lack of vision or lack of just we cannot do everything.
right.
I think testing is a really great service, and I appreciate the psychologists in my community that I can refer to, but I personally have no vision for in my own business structure to add psychology, to add testing. Um, I've talked to psychologists as potential recruits from my practice in the past, and I've told them that if they wanted to do testing, that I would be very supportive of that, but they would have to run it like more or less on their own because we run a practice that's pretty low admin. And if
Hmm.
they're wanting insurance credentialing, they're wanting like that would be a process we would have to figure out because it's not in place. And so it's not been a big um, a goal for me to in that.
Great. I guess my one thing we talked around about it, but I think my one thing is this adding a psychologist can improve your niche. Like if you see a lot of children, adding a testing psychologist that supports that can increase your brand and help you with your niche. Same thing with, the spinal clinic for older adults, like any of those things. Um, like I remember, we always sent people to neuropsych testing when we didn't know what to do with like the psychiatrist would see him and try a few things. It wasn't working. Like then we had to there was a child one. So we send them to the child neuropsych testing who could help us like narrow down where things are going, but it was super specialized. But it was lucrative and they were in great demand because it was specialized. And so if you're tending to have some sort of specialty, you can support your brand or your office by being the center of, you know,
Mhm,
autism, the center of autism in my area, well known. They're the place you go, for autism, and that just increases the value of their services. They can attract better quality employees. They can pay more because they get paid more. Like it just feeds on itself. So, um,
mhm,
yeah, my one thing is this can help you with your niche. So
mhm.
that's
Absolutely.
that. Okay,
Cool.
well, thanks, David, for joining me today. This is James Marland with Dr. David Hall. We'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the Scaling Therapy Practice. I hope you enjoyed the show. I want to remind you that the content shared today is for general information and entertainment purposes only. It shouldn't be considered as legal or tax advice. If you need a professional advice in those areas, please consult with a licensed attorney or accountant. But thank you so much for listening. The Scaling Therapy Practice is part of the PsyCraft Network.